my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
And welcome once again to On The Money. It's nearly the weekend, and this is your daily weekday dose of economics, business and consumer news. I'm Liam Halligan, and for the next hour, we'll be talking about all things COP26, with a whole host of subjects, with people who really know their stuff. But first, it's the GB News headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. This is your news at 1 o'clock. The UK hasn't ruled out military involvement in the ongoing dispute with France over post-Brexit fishing rights. The French authorities are yet to release a British scallop vessel detained yesterday for not having a licence. French prosecutors say the boat's captain will be called to court next August. Talking earlier to GB News, the Environment Secretary George Eustace said Navy vessels would be used if needed.
We want to try to resolve this dispute by getting France to understand and accept that those 55 vessels that haven't been granted a licence, probably aren't entitled to one. And if they're able to offer us the evidence that supports the applications, well, we'd process them. But for now, we're trying to de-escalate this. But we're also very clear that if France carries out the threats that they've made, then we will obviously make a proportionate response.
The US president has arrived at Vatican City, where he's meeting Pope Francis to discuss the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change and poverty. Joe Biden arrived in Europe, leaving a fraught domestic agenda in limbo back at home. It's after his fellow Democrats abandoned plans to vote for the president's nearly $3 trillion spending plan. Next, he'll travel to the G20 Leaders Summit in Rome before heading to Glasgow for COP26. Essex police have arrested 10 people after Insulate Britain protesters gathered on the M25. The Eco Group confirmed they'd attempted to block the road between junctions 28 and 29. Officers say both carriageways reopened within 30 minutes. It comes after an injunction was put in place by the High Court banning the group from obstructing traffic. The Scottish Government's providing £41 million to help families with their winter bills. The cash will be made available for those on low incomes who are struggling to pay for energy. It'll also help those at risk of homelessness. £6 million from the pot will go to charities that work with families in need. MPs are warning the Crossrail project is facing an £150 million funding gap. The Commons Public Accounts Committee expressed doubts over how and when taxpayers' loans will be repaid. That's after the collapse in fares revenue due to the coronavirus pandemic. It's predicted the cost of finishing the project is now at £18.9 billion. Coronavirus restrictions in Wales will be strengthened in a bid to curb infections, which are at the highest in the UK. First Minister Mark Drakeford will reintroduce some measures, including guidance around self-isolation. Adults and young people aged 5 to 17 will soon be asked to isolate until they receive a negative PCR test. That's if someone in their household has symptoms or tests positive. COVID passes will also be extended to theatres, cinemas and concert halls. Facebook has officially rebranded itself as a wider company called Meta. It's designed to represent the social media network's expanding business plan into what they're calling the metaverse. That's an online world where people can meet, play and work virtually. The core Facebook service will still remain unchanged. Archaeologists have discovered Roman artefacts during HS2 works in Stoke Mandeville. They made a once-in-a-lifetime discovery of statues and other pieces at St Mary's Church. Dr. Rachel Wood, the lead archaeologist on the site, called the findings significant.
Really rare finds in the UK. To find one stone head or one set of shoulders would be really, really astonishing, but we have two complete heads and shoulders as well as a third head as well. And they're even more significant to us archaeologically because they've actually helped change our understanding of the site here before the medieval church was built.
And you're right up to date. I'll bring you the latest headlines in half an hour now. Let's return to Liam and On the Money.
And this is On the Money. Now, the COP26 Climate Change Summit kicks off in Glasgow on Sunday. And once again, eco-protesters are gathering in London and will no doubt soon be heading north of the border. As the emotional outrage cranks up, we'll be delving into the detail, into the numbers to ask as we move towards electric cars and heat pumps, will ordinary workers be footing the bill for what many politicians privately call all this green stuff? Plus, every weekday we speak to business people at the top of their game, and today we're talking to Vegard Bringsjord. He's the co-founder of Wastefront, a rubber waste recycling company which converts disused tyres into useful commodities. Who knew? The company's now launching a new project in Sunderland, bringing plenty of jobs to the northeast. That's my Money Talks interview later in the show. And as ever, we want your questions, opinions, suggestions. What should On the Money be covering? What do you think of today's debate? This is your show too, so get in touch. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. We'll read out some of your emails later in the show, so stay with us. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and you're On the Money. Now, millions of UK households are facing a tough winter amid soaring wholesale gas prices. Earlier this month, the cap on consumer utility bills was raised by £139, bringing the average household combined gas and electricity bill to £1,277 a year. Industry analysts warn wholesale prices will stay high for some time. So when the household price cap is reset next spring, average household utility bills, could hit a pulverising £2,000 a year. The National Grid's highlighted a rising risk of winter blackouts. The campaign group National Energy Action warns another 1.5 million households could be plunged into poverty once the energy price cap is lifted once again. Yet amidst all the obvious downsides of this energy price spike, one potential upside is that during this 12-day COP26 summit in Glasgow, which kicks off this weekend, politicians will have to start being more honest about the cost of meeting their ambitious decarbonisation targets. In June 2019, Theresa May made a unilateral and legally binding commitment that the UK could reach net zero carbon emission by 2050, but without any real idea of how that would be achieved or paid for. A Treasury review of the cost of this immense undertaking that's been delayed for months. And during this week's budget statement, Chancellor Rishi Sunak once again said nothing about this crucial decarbonisation cost issue. But it's clear the UK's 2050 net zero commitment involves an absolutely huge social and economic shift. And it looks for now as if much of the burden of that change will be shouldered by ordinary people. By 2030, we already know new petrol and diesel vehicles will be banned, but electric cars typically cost 50% more than their fossil fuel equivalents. Millions of domestic gas boilers are to be ripped out and replaced by electric heat pumps. But the bill for each of those will be £10,000, £15,000, £20,000. And then on top of that, they cost more to run. Who will pay for all of that? Renewable energy, meanwhile, is hugely subsidised, causing fuel bills to rise. The energy regulator Ofcom estimates some 20-odd% of what UK households pay for electricity now goes on environmental and social costs, which in plain speak largely amounts to a subsidy for decarbonisation strategies. And we're now in the bizarre situation that as energy prices spiral, the Western world's been begging the OPEC oil exporting cartel and Vladimir Putin's Russia to pump more oil and gas, just as the global great and good gear up for Scottish Davos, this Glasgow COP26 corporate jolly, well, where they will sign all of us up to even more ambitious decarbonisation targets. And that's your on-the-money debate during this hour. This COP26 agenda. Will ordinary workers pay? So what you get on the money is in-depth conversations with people who really know their stuff. And joining me down the line is the climate columnist for The Independent, Donica McCarthy, returning to the show. Good to see you, Donica. And also we have the founder of The Energy Shop, Joe Malinowski, and with me in the studio, good friend of the show, Vicky Price, who, of course, helped me to present the budget earlier this week. Good to see you again, Vicky. Let's start with you, Donica. Ahead of COP26, clearly all eyes are going to be on Glasgow. The eyes of much of the world, though maybe not the Chinese, because, of course, President Xi's not turning up. But do you think, as this summit goes on, and it's a 12-day marathon talking shop, do you think more will be said about the cost of decarbonisation as opposed to simply the aspiration?
To be frank with you, I don't have much hope for this COP. We've had 25 of them to date, and they haven't succeeded even in reducing the growth in carbon emissions. I would take some issue with your introduction to this piece. You talked about the cost. You didn't talk about the cost of not taking action on climate, and you didn't talk about the financial benefits, the thousands of jobs, the billions of pounds of income in taxes, etc., etc. We shouldn't talk about investment. Corporations don't talk about investments as a cost. They talk about as investment. So investing in homes so they cost less to run means poorer people have lower bills. If we invest in cycle lanes so people can cycle to work and take our kids to school by bike or walking, means that we don't have to pay cars and we have a healthier society and happier children. There are pluses to this. It's not all about negative. And the most important point I'd like to make, and I'd really recommend, Liam, if you haven't read it already, is the report from the Chatham House Climate Impacts Report commissioned by the Department of Foreign Affairs. It actually is terrifying about the cost for future Britain of not taking action. We now have a 1% chance, just a 1% chance of not breaking through 1.5 degrees centigrade rise in temperatures, with the implications for Britain terrifying.
Donica, particularly on the upsides of the transition, the potential green jobs and so on. I've been doing a lot of work over recent weeks and months investigating the hydrogen economy and renewable energy in general. We often feature it on the money, but it's absolutely right of you to make that point at this point as well. Joe Malinowski, tell us your perspective as we go into this winter. I mentioned in my opening statement that fuel bills have already gone up a lot and they're set to go up much more. Do you think that will help to focus minds throughout this COP summit on the costs of decarbonisation?
That is actually a very interesting question. I mean, the backdrop of rising wholesale prices because of a shortage of gas and a failure of renewables to step in when they were needed is somewhat unfavourable, because at the time when one of the objectives is to completely phase out coal, we've had to sort of revert back to coal production to make up some of the deficits. So it's not a sort of favourable environment, that's for sure. As far as COP26 is going to go, and as you mentioned, bills are, and actually gas wasn't supposed to be even one of the big talking points, but gas has had to step in to make up a shortage of renewable production because particularly during September we had very low wind generation. In some days, practically nothing, when typically wind generation accounts for, say, 20-25% of the fuel, the electricity generation mix at the present time. And we've had to resort to alternative sources, gas, at a time when there wasn't any gas. So it's not a great backdrop. Will they focus on the costs? It's a very, very good question, actually. I mean, there's some issues they didn't want to talk about, which they are going to have to address.
Vicky, great to have you back in the studio. As I said, you used to run the Government Economic Service. You were one of the most senior economists in Whitehall, if not the most senior at one stage. I was surprised in this budget that Rishi Sunak said nothing in the speech or even in the technical documents that I've seen so far. I'm still wading through them on the costs of decarbonisation. There's been a review in the works for a long time, hasn't there, to really interrogate this £50 billion a year each year until 2050 number that we talk about. Were you surprised too?
I was a bit. Of course, we had the net zero strategy that came out a little while before, just a few days before. So there were already some estimates of some...
Not many numbers in it, though.
Not many numbers. Yeah. And so there is a lot to be filled in. And of course, the question you were asking earlier, who's going to pay for this? Of course, there is a subsidy which is being offered through a new scheme, which replaced two other schemes that didn't work, for heat pumps, for example.
Yeah.
Which doesn't really take account of how many households will need to.
That's right. And it was only for £5,000 a household,
exactly.
wasn't it? I put that to a plumber actually, and he literally laughed in my face. He said £15,000 or £20,000. That's now. OK, the technology may improve, but £5,000 for a few sharp-elbowed households, middle-class people who can fill in the forms and do all the research?
Well, they're assuming about 7,500 in the calculations, and there's
27 million households in the UK.
Absolutely, but they're also hoping, because they've said that industry is going to indeed become much more efficient in this area, and therefore it's going to cost an awful lot less at the end of, or during the period during which all these changes will need to happen. Well, maybe. Technology, as we know, has amazing ability to really make things much more affordable, as we've seen in so many of the renewables, for example. But they have all had to have very sustained subsidies from the government to get there. But it is absolutely true that there are some benefits out of doing this. Obviously, your costs in the future, if everything comes from renewables, you don't have to pay the huge sums of money we're paying right now to get gas or oil in whatever form and use it in our cars and so on. So the idea is that indeed in the future we benefit. But in the process, it costs an awful lot. And I think what Nick Stern calculated in his climate change review is that we need to be putting 1 or 2% of GDP, world GDP, into all this every year. And we're not doing that.
Big money, big money. Donica, let's come back to you. I don't want you to think that I'm too miserable on this issue. I'm a big fan of your writing, as I've said on the show before. I'm also very, very interested in renewable energy and the hydrogen economy. I was talking just today to Andrew Forrester, who's someone who you will know, who runs the Fortescue Mining Group in Australia, who's a huge evangelist for the hydrogen economy. We'll be bringing you that interview here on The Money quite soon, early next week, we hope. But I did want to put to you, Donica, as Vicky Price said there rightly, it's getting from here to there is a good idea, because once we're there, once we're using many more renewables, it will be cheaper. But it's the cost of getting from here to there. And I would suggest, as somebody who broadly supports this agenda, the government's got a lot of reassuring to do of ordinary men and women and households and firms that we can get from here to there without ordinary people being absolutely hammered. And unless they win that argument, then Conservative backbenchers and other lobby groups are going to make it very difficult.
Yeah, I think we need to be careful about this exaggeration of the costs, whether it's about heat pumps or EVs. Because I'm passionate about and I understand the science and I understand the threat, I have invested in my house. I was the first house to invest in solar panels in 1998 to sell electricity to the grid. 1998. It was around £12,000 a kilowatt then to install them. It's now less than £800. So when you kick in mass production, the price of renewable energy collapses. Nowadays, solar and wind is the cheapest energy in most markets globally. In the United Kingdom, it was just 5 years ago, wind was £120 per kilowatt per megawatt. It's now £40 per megawatt. So that's what we need to be careful when we exaggerate these numbers of current costs. But investing for small amounts at the beginning to bring down the cost is really good. It's really good approach. But the other point I'd like to make is that, I could actually come up with £1 trillion investment over the next 10 years that wouldn't involve any new taxes. So, for example, the most important one, the United Kingdom's financial industries are proposing to invest $750 billion in new fossil fuels. In fossil fuels that we cannot afford to burn unless it destroys Britain. If the government redirected that investment of $750 billion into renewables and energy efficiency in the United Kingdom, we could make a massive dent in the investment needed by 2030.
All good points as ever, Donica. Joe, let's go back to you. I mean, Donica's right when we have to think that technology will bring the costs of these alternative energy sources and renewables down as the number of people involved crank up. And also the status quo is pretty expensive, particularly here in the UK, where we have very little gas storage now after the Rough facility closed in 2017 off the Yorkshire coast. We're completely reliant on the spot market and mainly imported gas as well. So do you think the government, as this winter happens and high prices emerge, could say, look, only a fifth of our electricity is renewables, it's moving to renewables, it won't cost, it will actually bring prices down in the end so they can use high bills, as we've got at the moment, under a mainly fossil fuel situation in order to argue effectively for a move towards more renewables?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what they're doing at the present moment in time. I mean, we've seen all the interviews from Kwasi Kwarteng saying the problem to the solution is more renewables. And it is in the long term. The issue is it can do very, very little in the short term for you because these are long-term capital investment projects. The payback is measured in years, necessarily in decades. Once you've sunk the cost, then clearly the marginal cost of production is for solar and wind is practically zero. But it won't actually do anything at all to help consumers through the current winter period, because for every day wholesale gas price, and unless you can substitute gas usage at the present moment in time with renewables, which you can't in the short run, then for every day that wholesale gas prices stay at current levels, the energy price cap is being added to at a rate of £3 to £4 a day for every day. And that's going to continue for the next 6 months. So by the time we get to the end of March, we are looking, like you say, a price cap which is heading closer to 2,000. I don't think it's going to get to 2,000 on our numbers. It's looking closer to 1,750. But that's almost another £500 on top of where we are already. It's going to be a very painful time for consumers. I mean, I think the one take-home message from this for consumers is going to be that you need to start looking at energy efficiency measures, the short, quick fixes that anybody can do without investment. Stop boiling big kettles of water. Look at draft insulation, and then it's going to be quite a big ask at the present time to be asking consumers to make. And I totally agree with your other speakers saying there's a difference between investment, which is for the long term and has a payback, and the investment payback in renewable energy is obviously going to be in terms of greater efficiency and lower operating costs in the long term. But there is a huge capital cost. There is a huge capital cost in buying a more expensive electric vehicle. There is a huge capital cost in the alternative to installing ground source or air source heat pumps, the payback comes over the very long term. But if consumers are getting thumped with higher energy costs now and with even more significant energy costs now, the question is, where are they going to get the resources from to be able to afford those capital projects to get their long-term bills under control? These are, for an average consumer, these are significant numbers which need to get paid back over long periods of time. So I think on top of the fact that we need to rely on, and justifiably we can rely on new technologies coming in, once you start reducing the red tape and allowing innovation and technology to do its things, it can move very, very quickly and achieve some miracles as well. But in the meantime, when consumers are so stretched, we are going to have some huge innovations in the way these things are actually financed, so consumers can actually afford them without having to stump up the bills up front. Otherwise, to be fair, I don't think it's going to happen unless you find an easy way for consumers to finance these things.
You're on the money with me, Liam Halligan. Joe Malinowski of the Energy Shop. He's just absolutely put his finger on the conundrum we face. Good job, then, that after the break, we're going to keep this discussion going with Dorica McCarthy, climate change columnist at the Independent, with Joe Malinowski and with Vicky Price, our On the Money regular panellists. Your emails are flooding in. This issue always gets viewers going. We'll be reading out some of those shortly. But right now, it's time to take a look at the weather. Stay with us. You're on the money.
Hello again. It's been a wet start to the day for many of us, but the main bands of rain through the afternoon will be moving away, replaced by a mix of sunshine and showers, and it will feel less mild today and more especially through the weekend. This weather front was stuck across northern England and southern Scotland during this week, and it brought an awful lot of rainfall with it. It's still causing issues with further spells of rain moving through Wales, northern England, as well as much of Scotland through the afternoon. In some places, another 20 to 30 millimetres, and of course that falling onto saturated ground could cause some issues. But it's replaced by sunshine and showers, blustery winds pushing those showers into Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest, and cooler air follows as well, with temperatures a couple of degrees down compared to recent days, but still above average for the time of year. The wet weather continues there for eastern and northern Scotland for a time into the evening. Clear spells then follow, but another system pushes in, a very lively system overnight actually, across most parts. Very gusty winds, heavy rainfall, could be quite noisy as that arrives. Ahead of that, it's going to be clear across eastern England, and behind it, temperatures dipping to -1 for some sheltered parts of northern and northwest Scotland. Nevertheless, this heavy rain is with us first thing on Saturday. It's moving into eastern England, eastern Scotland as well. It clears to sunny spells and showers for Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest. Some of these showers again on the lively side with gusty winds. But once it pulls away, some decent sunny spells breaking out across the Midlands, eastern England as well. And a cooler day for all, with temperatures back to around average for the time of year. So we say goodbye to that system on Saturday night. Clear spells briefly before the next weather system moves in, a series of weather fronts and wrapped around a developing area of low pressure to bring yet more wind and rain during Saturday. Much of that clearing through during the morning, replaced again by sunny spells and showers. It remains changeable on Monday.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GBNews.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
Welcome back, you're on the money. Now, this weekend is, of course, the start of the climate change conference COP26 in Glasgow. And it's clear the UK's 2050 net zero commitment involves an absolutely huge social and economic shift. And much of that burden could be shouldered by ordinary people. But no one, not even the Chancellor at this week's budget, was talking about the cost issue that these ambitious decarbonisation targets entail. Who will be able to afford it? That's our big discussion today on The Money. Still with me to discuss this, Donica McCarthy, climate columnist at The Independent. We've got Joe Malinowski of The Energy Shop and Vicky Price, friend of the show, former head of the government's economic service. Donica, let's come back to you. You'll know better than me, better than anyone perhaps, that China accounts for more carbon emissions than the whole of the rest of the industrialised world put together. And yet President Xi isn't turning up in Glasgow. He's sending a few observers. But without the Chinese on board, isn't a lot of this discussion, it's moot before it started?
You're correct that China is the largest emitter of fossil fuels in the world. It's not more than the entire industrial world. It's 27% of global emissions. It is a key player. And we have to get to the table. You're absolutely right. If we don't get to the table, then the OECD needs to think about how we deal with that problem. So, for example, we could put, and the European Union's talking about it, is putting carbon import taxes. So goods that are made with coal in China would incur a tax as they come into the European Union or into the United Kingdom. The other point I'd like to make when China is brought up, and I have referred to earlier in our discussion, is the United Kingdom is responsible for 15 to 16% of global emissions, mainly through our financial sector investments. So when we talk to China about 27%, China is around 20% of the world's population. The United Kingdom is 1% of the world's population and 16% of global emissions responsible for investments. So we have a huge role here to provide leadership, but we must tackle China. I completely agree with you.
I totally take your point, Donica. Exactly right on carbon emissions per head. China is not a particular outlier. I would take issue on trying to suggest that the UK is up to 16% of emissions on financial investment, just because that stems from investments that are managed and sourced by UK-based financial services companies. So let's not exaggerate it the other way either. I mean, surely you would think it's a good thing that the UK was pretty much the first advanced country in the world to sign up to a legally binding net zero target.
Yes, we both agree that it's good for us to sign up to a net zero target for the 1% of global emissions that we're responsible domestically. But if we are investing and profiting from 15% of fossil fuel investments globally, that gives us a massive responsibility. The International Energy Agency, not a green group, the world's most responsible and respected energy think tank, funded by the developed world countries, says very clearly, we cannot invest in new fossil fuels if we're going to reach even 2050 net zero. So that's the elephant in the room that we need to start talking about, and it's not going to be spoken about at COP. Because all of the rich countries want to hang on to the profits for their investments in global fossil fuels. And that's a disaster for Britain and for the world.
That's a point well made. Joe Malinowski, let's come back to the brass tacks of what it means to people watching this show, ordinary households and firms. I know you watch the politics of this closely. Do you see politicians pushing back on this net zero agenda in order to try and highlight the costs of getting from here to there, that transition that Vicky Pryce mentioned?
I think some politicians will, and many others won't. I think views on this are somewhat polarised, and unfortunately, I think are getting more polarised once it becomes apparent that there is, I would say, no easy path, and possibly no path which is cost-free for consumers in the process. It would be great if we could build consensus. It's a path we have to follow. I thoroughly believe that. But I think that it is about the message, and unfortunately, it's sometimes the people who are putting out the messages are, frankly, the biggest hypocrites out there in terms of their own personal actions, and that really doesn't help at all.
Vicky, let me turn to you. With your big experience of working in government and formulating policies, taking the long-term view, that's what you used to do for a living. What do you think's going to happen here? All eyes are on COP. There'll be endless coverage of people gluing themselves to the road and holding banners and scuffles with the police and people hobnobbing and making announcements. But what will actually happen, do you think, over the next few years to household fuel bills?
Well, they will go up in the short term without any doubt because of the situation we're in. Remember that the UK's energy needs are still met, 70% of them, by oil and gas. Yeah. So we have a long transition there. I mean, hopefully technology will change things quite rapidly. But we are right now, we've got to also bear in mind, we're recovering from a pandemic. We've also got some problems here in the UK because we don't have gas storage facilities of the sort that perhaps the Europeans do, where they have pressures as well, but they're nothing like as big as they are here. In a while, assuming politics improves, particularly the relationship between the EU and Russia, there will be more gas available. So in the short term, we are completely and utterly relying on fossil fuel prices coming down again because supply will increase. So in the short to medium term, I think things will improve for the consumer. But in the very, very short term, which is like now and next year, prices will still be high. And given that we've just had this budget, which you and I were talking about just a couple of days ago, of course, and covering here, which is now estimated to lead to quite a drop in disposable incomes after inflation and after tax.
For all the high spending, that's right.
Of course, you add that to it, and of course the consumer is going to be really pushed to be able to survive in any sort of sensible manner over the next year.
Interesting that the Russians pumped more gas just over the last few days. The spot price fell a bit on wholesale markets. And we haven't even discussed that much today, those fuel bills for manufacturers, steel makers. Of course, no price cap for corporates. The price cap only applies to households. But it's been a good discussion. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Donica McCarthy. As ever, keep coming back on the show. And Joe Malinowski of the Energy Shop. You see, deep discussions, in depth, with people who really know your stuff. That's what you get here on The Money with me, Liam Halligan. And after the break, we'll be speaking to the co-founder of the rubber waste company Wastefront. That's Vegard Brinsfjord. That's my Money Talks interview today. Their new project's creating plenty of jobs in the northeast, and that's up next. But before that, here's the GB News headlines once more with Rhiannon Jones.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. Here are the latest headlines. The UK hasn't ruled out military involvement in the ongoing dispute with France over post-Brexit fishing rights. The French authorities are yet to release a British scallop vessel detained yesterday for not having a licence. French prosecutors say the boat's captain will be called to court next August. The US president arrived at the Vatican earlier, where he's been meeting Pope Francis to discuss the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change and poverty. From there, Joe Biden will travel to the G20 Leaders Summit in Rome before heading to Glasgow for COP26. A serving Met police officer has been charged with child sex offences. 51-year-old Detective Constable Francois Olwich was arrested yesterday at an address in Basingstoke. He's facing 4 charges, including attempting to meet a girl under 16 years of age. Essex police have arrested 10 Insulate Britain activists after they staged another protest on the M25. A number of people blocked the motorway between junctions 28 and 29 earlier this morning. It comes after an injunction was put in place by the High Court banning the group from obstructing traffic. And archaeologists have discovered Roman artefacts during HS2 works in Stoke Mandeville. They made a once-in-a-lifetime discovery of statues and other pieces at St Mary's Church. I'll have more on all of today's main stories at the top of the hour. See you then.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
Welcome back. You're on the money with me, Liam Halligan. Lots of you have got in touch to give us your thoughts on COP26. Of course you have. This is such a contentious subject. Mike says population increase is the underlying cause of most of the world's environmental problems, both current and future. Paddy also joins in the discussion, adding the UK produces a small percentage of the world's environmental pollution. As long as the likes of China, US, Russia, India are pumping out massive amounts of pollution, we're wasting our time trying to sort out the issue from the UK. Denise then says, climate change has and always will happen. It's nature. There's only so much that we can do to tackle it. Keep your emails coming in. We'll be reading out some more of them later in the show. And now, it's time for my daily interview series, Money Talks. So each day On the Money features an in-depth Money Talks interview with a business leader, policymaker or someone else with a particularly interesting perspective. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Vegard Brynjor. He's the Chief Financial Officer and co-founder of Wastefront. This is a rubber waste recycling company and it was founded in Oslo, the capital of Norway, of course, in 2019. The company aims to reduce the negative environmental impact associated with end-of-life tyre waste, which is pretty fitting, we thought, ahead of the COP26 summit on Sunday. Many tyres are banned from being put into landfill due to pollutants found in them, and this is where Wastefront steps in. They're also developing a tyre waste recovery project in Sunderland, which will create lots of jobs up there in the northeast. So here to tell us more is Vegard Brynjor. Very nice to see you, to have you in the On the Money studio. You are our first ever Norwegian Money Talks interviewee.
Privileged.
What was your vision? Why did you start this company?
So we're looking at this, and you have this massive problem with waste tires. It's a product that you need globally. Everywhere in the world you find tires and waste tires. There's a massive production. In the UK alone, you have 55 million tires, or waste tires, generated every single year.
Wow.
If you, just to give you an idea of the size of that, if you put those side by side, that will reach around the equator and then some. If you stack them all together, it'll be 1.5 times the size of the O2 here in London. So it's a massive problem.
That huge dome.
That is going to be a huge dome, and that's 1.5 times that with waste tires every single year. So it was pretty clear to us that this is a problem that needs to find a solution to, and basically that's what we're going to do. So we are currently, as you mentioned, we're looking at a project in Sunderland. We're going to be investing £100 million to a facility up there, creating around 100 jobs or skilled jobs up in Sunderland, and doing our part in helping Britain solve its problem with waste tires.
So broadly speaking, Vegard, what you do is you take the tyres and you shred them up and you can mix them with other waste and you create a substance which then can be used to generate energy in a relatively carbon neutral fashion. So you're using technology to overcome a problem of what otherwise would be polluting landfill. Is that about right?
It's about right. We take the tires, we're not mixing in anything else.
Okay.
Those are cut up, we put them into what's called a pyrolysis reactor. Yeah. Pyrolysis is a technology that you probably have at home in your oven, which you use to clean your oven. We use that. Basically, it's a big oven where you heat up the material without the presence of oxygen, so you melt it down and you get products at the end of it. So what we're producing at the end of our process, where we take the waste product, we get a fuel, which is essentially a biofuel, and then you get a product that's called recovered carbon black, which can go back into producing new tires. So to get that circularity.
We just saw some pictures there of your recycling plant. What sort of scale are you doing this operation at now, Vegard?
So in Sunderland, we're going to have a facility that can take 53,000 tonnes of waste tires.
So we're seeing a computer simulation here of what it will look like?
Yes. So that plant will be able to take 73,000 tonnes of waste tires every year. That's about 15% of what the UK produces. So we're starting off by doing the first bit. If you look at it historically, what's happening with those tires, I mean, the UK has banned them from landfill, but it still have to go somewhere.
That's right.
What has happened in a lot of cases, not just the UK, but also other Western European countries, they're shipped off to the north of Africa or Central Asia.
For someone else's landfill.
For someone else's landfill, or to be burnt, or who knows.
Yeah.
It's basically, you
just draw a veil over the problem,
close your eyes,
give it to someone else, but it's the same world.
Yes, exactly. And you look at that, and of course, if your neighbour starts a bonfire burning plastic, you're going to be affected by that.
Right.
So if those tires go to India to be burnt, it's still coming back into the environment for everyone else.
It's very interesting. Of course, you know, Scandinavia in general, Norway in particular, obviously you face the northeast of England. We all know the huge sort of links between the northeast, you know, blood ties over the years, trade ties over the years. I'm always surprised how many Norwegian fans there are of Newcastle United and Sunderland. There are guys there are families that come over every other week or something, isn't it? But that's not the question I wanted to ask. The question I wanted to ask is this. Do you agree that there's something really going on in the northeast? The reason I put that to you is because this time last year I made a documentary up there and I featured a company called Wastefront. And it's a company which, like you, takes tyres, but it does also mix the tyres with other industrial waste and using a slightly different technology to the technology you've described, converts it into pellets that can then be burnt in incinerators, producing energy in a carbon neutral way while solving that landfill problem that you talked about. And the founders of Wastefront, they were talking about clustering effects, agglomeration effects. Obviously, you've got the port right there where you can ship your tyres in, you can transport them, even if they're coming from elsewhere in the UK, because you can transport them by sea. What was it that attracted you? You could have put your business anywhere. Why did you go to the northeast of England? Was it partly that clustering effect as it tries to become a kind of green finance, green technology hub?
I think that's part of the answer. I think the council up there, or in general, there seems to be quite a strong push for Sunderland to move into this space, and it's very much welcoming, and that's what we've felt since the first time Wastefront spoke with our landlord in Sunderland, which is the port. Very much welcome to that, and they understand a little bit about our business. So I think that kind of comes from the clustering that you've seen it before, which obviously helps us. But again, with Sunderland, you also have the history of Sunderland, which of course is key. We're looking at the people in Sunderland and seeing that there's a lot of people with good experience and transferable skills, which we look at as a massive value for us. It's super important to have those people.
This is really interesting to you. With all respect, obviously somebody who knows the UK extremely well is very comfortable here, but you're from another country, albeit a country very close to our own. We feel an affinity with you. You said that it's about the people of Sunderland and their skills. Tell me more. This is really interesting.
If you're looking at what we're doing, so we're generating, there's going to be around 100 jobs that are directly linked to us, either on plant or in relation to that. I mean, you look at that, there's going to be managers, there's going to be operators, there's going to be lab technicians. If you look at people in Sunderland, you have that history of manufacturing industry, and having people that have been there, being able to use what they've learned from before is something that we highly value.
I've talked to fund managers in the City of London who are now actively looking for investments in green technology, in particularly converting waste into energy in the north of England. It seems to be quite a kind of fashionable area. There seems to be a bit of a buzz about venture capital getting into this space of green technology. Do you see that continuing?
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of interest in the space in general. I mean, we're seeing it. I'm sure our colleagues in other companies are seeing the same thing. You have people going from, or investors that are coming from traditional oil and gas investing that are moving towards the renewables. And in between oil and gas and renewables, you have this industry that kind of a little bit of both. So you see a lot of people that are moving towards it, and it's been good for us. But you're also seeing government. I mean, with the UK Investment or Infrastructure Bank launching and looking at activity outside of London and things that would help towards net zero. So there's an enormous amount of interest and I think also appetite to get into the space.
I think it's particularly interesting we're talking to you today on this, the last On the Money before COP26 gets going, because of course so much of the media focus is on the protesters and the politics and the political pushback. But you and I know, and people who follow business know, and we need to tell everyone else, there's a huge technological revolution going on. And there are people with serious money looking for returns who aren't doing this because it's charity, who aren't doing it because they want to feel good or look good. They're doing this because there's a return to be made, because technology is advancing that can help us to generate energy in a cleaner and ultimately cheaper way.
Yeah. No, we saw that. I mean, one of my colleagues was present at the Global Investment Summit last week, where you have all the big global financiers present, and there's a clear push towards it. And you're seeing that essentially in every layer of the value chain, even from the beginning. You look at the car industry, they're looking at producing more environmentally friendly. The tire manufacturers are all announcing targets of needing to include a lot more recycled or recovered content in their tires. So you want to implement this cyclicality into the entire industry. And to your point, I mean, you need investment, and to get investment, you also need to make money. And you're getting to that point now where you have businesses like ours, which is doing a lot of good for the environment, of course, but primarily we're also an economic business. We're going to make money for our investors.
Because so often we do discuss, there's a kind of an alarmism and a catastrophism about our discussions on climate change, isn't there? And yet you must be actually quite optimistic, not complacent, but you have decided to invest your skills, your energy, your career in this area. Do you think in the end technology can rescue us? Will this ultimately be a problem that is corrected by invention and innovation, or sacrifice and expense for ordinary households, or a bit of both?
It's a good question. I mean, if you look at the technology...
It's the question, isn't it?
It is the question. I mean, if you look at the technology, we are actually... Most of the technology that we are using is technology that is already existing. It's in operation. Yeah. We're not inventing our own technology. We're just putting pieces together and creating that value chain. So it's important to in order to do that, you need to have a certain scale of it for the right partners to be interested. Like for ourselves, we're working a lot with Vitol, the energy trader.
Yeah.
And they're quite heavily invested in moving into this field. And you need people to be interested, and you need to have a certain scale. And you can do that by using existing technology, or as someone else are doing, you get into the new technology. So for us, we start with what is already there and what we can do now. We have an R&D team that's working continuously on improving the process and what we get out on the other side of things, but the most important thing is to actually deal with the problems. So I think a lot of the problem can be solved with technology, but certain things you probably have to be a bit more conscious of as a consumer. I think it's everyone's responsibility to actually deal with. You can't point in one direction or the other. Because someone is not doing their part doesn't mean that you shouldn't do your part. So it's a little bit on everyone's shoulders. And with Wastefront, we're doing that. We're going into Sunderland now, and then we're looking at where to go next. So there's plenty to be done.
I've got one question left, and it's a question you won't have been expecting. I'm not going to ask you about the Norwegian manager of Man United, the baby-faced assassin we call him, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. What I'm going to ask is this. I know from my own travels in Norway, particularly the north of Norway, the sort of closeness, the regard there is, genuine regard there is for British people in your country, and you send us a Christmas tree every year that goes up in Trafalgar Square and so on. But Norway is now an energy giant. You have these huge oil and indeed gas reserves, and we're pretty dependent, aren't we, on that pipeline from Norway, the Langeland pipeline that comes in just near Hull there. What is Norway thinking, looking on at the UK in the midst of this energy crisis? The fact that we've got no gas storage, the fact that we have left ourselves completely reliant pretty much on the spot market rather than being a bit smarter.
I shouldn't say that I can kind of answer this on behalf of Norway, but I think in general, if you look at the relationship with Norway and Great Britain, that's been good for a long time.
Yeah.
You just opened the power cable now.
Yeah.
Was that a few weeks ago?
That's right.
And Norway is in a position where we have an excess of energy in general and power. So Norway needs international trade partners. Norway takes business from Norway and goes abroad, which in a sense is what's happened with Wastefront. We never really looked at Norway because Norway is not big enough for us to do anything.
Well, as I always say to friends when they ask me about the UK's energy future, I say, don't worry about the Russians. It's when the Norwegians stop sending us that Christmas tree. That's when we should really start worrying. Vegard Brinshaw, it's been great to talk to you of Wastefront, and all the very best with your business. Thanks for appearing on Money Talks. And you're watching On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. Stay with me, as I'll be with you for yet another hour. You lucky people. Lots more to come, including a big discussion on whether more money, Rishi's billions, can fix the NHS. Stay with us. You're On the Money.
Hello again. It's been a wet start to the day for many of us, but the main bands of rain through the afternoon will be moving away, replaced by a mix of sunshine and showers, and it will feel less mild today and more especially through the weekend. This weather front was stuck across northern England and southern Scotland during this week, and it brought an awful lot of rainfall with it. It's still causing issues with further spells of rain moving through Wales, northern England, as well as much of Scotland through the afternoon. In some places, another 20 to 30 millimetres, and of course that falling onto saturated ground could cause some issues. But it's replaced by sunshine and showers, blustery winds pushing those showers into Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest, and cooler air follows as well, with temperatures a couple of degrees down compared to recent days, but still above average for the time of year. The wet weather continues there for eastern and northern Scotland for a time into the evening. Clear spells then follow, but another system pushes in, a very lively system overnight actually, across most parts. Very gusty winds, heavy rainfall, could be quite noisy as that arrives. Ahead of that, it's going to be clear across eastern England, and behind it, temperatures dipping to -1 for some sheltered parts of northern and northwest Scotland. Nevertheless, this heavy rain is with us first thing on Saturday. It's moving into eastern England, eastern Scotland as well. It clears to sunny spells and showers for Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest. Some of these showers again on the lively side with gusty winds. But once it pulls away, some decent sunny spells breaking out across the Midlands, eastern England as well. And a cooler day for all, with temperatures back to around average for the time of year. So we say goodbye to that system on Saturday night, clears bells briefly before the next weather system moves in, a series of weather fronts and wrapped around a developing area of low pressure to bring yet more wind and rain during Saturday. Much of that clearing through during the morning, replaced again by sunny spells and showers. It remains changeable on Monday.
Join me, Nana Akweer, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone. We learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News. 4 to the point.
Welcome back to another hour of On the Money. I'm Liam Halligan, and we'll be asking this time, will Rishi's billions really fix the NHS? With yet another brilliant panel. But first, it's the GB News headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. This is your news at 2 o'clock. The UK hasn't ruled out military involvement in the ongoing dispute with France over post-Brexit fishing rights. The French authorities are yet to release a British scallop vessel that was detained for not having a licence. French prosecutors say the boat's captain will be called to court next August. Talking earlier to GB News, the Environment Secretary George Eustace said Navy vessels would be used if needed.
We want to try to resolve this dispute by getting France to understand and accept that those 55 vessels that haven't been granted a licence, probably aren't entitled to one. And if they're able to offer us the evidence that supports the applications, well, we'd process them. But for now, we're trying to de-escalate this. But we're also very clear that if France carries out the threats that they've made, then we will obviously make a proportionate response.
The US President has held what's been described as an unusually long meeting with Pope Francis at the Vatican to discuss the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change and poverty. Vatican officials said the private meeting lasted an hour and 15 minutes before pictures were taken with a wider delegation. Joe Biden has arrived in Europe, leaving a fraught domestic agenda in limbo back at home. It's after his fellow Democrats abandoned plans to vote for the president's nearly $3 trillion spending plan. Next, he'll travel to the G20 Leaders Summit in Rome before heading to Glasgow for COP26. The Scottish Government's providing £41 million to help families with their winter bills. The cash will be made available for those on low incomes who are struggling to pay for energy. It'll also help those at risk of homelessness. £6 million from the pot will go to charities that work with families in need. Coronavirus restrictions in Wales will be strengthened in a bid to curb infections, which are the highest in the UK. First Minister Mark Drakeford will reintroduce some measures, including guidance around self-isolation. Adults and young people aged 5 to 17 will soon be asked to isolate until they receive a negative PCR test. That's if someone in their household has symptoms or test positive. COVID passes will also be extended to theatres, cinemas and concert halls. Essex police have arrested 10 people after Insulate Britain protesters gathered on the M25. The Eco Group confirmed they'd attempted to block the road between junctions 28 and 29. Officers say both carriageways reopened within 30 minutes. It comes after an injunction was put in place by the High Court banning the group from obstructing traffic. MPs are warning the Crossrail project is facing an £150 million funding gap. The Commons Public Accounts Committee expressed doubts over how and when taxpayers' loans will be repaid. That's after the collapse in fares revenue due to the coronavirus pandemic. It's predicted the cost of finishing the project is now at £18.9 billion. West Yorkshire police are searching for a pair of missing marsupials who are believed to have been kept as pets at a home in Leeds. The male and female wallabies, called Roxy and Amadeus, have gone missing from an address in the north of the city. Police are warning people not to get too close to the animals, but instead to trap them and then call 101. You're right up to date. I'll be back with the latest headlines in half an hour, but now it's back to Liam and On the Money.
And this is On the Money. It's just after 2 p.m. and coming up this hour, as Chancellor Rishi Sunak announces yet another £6 billion for the National Health Service in his latest budget, we're asking, is this enough to tackle the growing backlog? Plus,
you signed up for life insurance with a company called Dead Happy. Well, yeah. Well, I find it disrespectful and unprofessional, Michael.
Plus, for this hour's Money Talks, I'm speaking with Phil Zeidler. He's the co-founder and CEO of the UK's fastest growing life insurance provider called Dead Happy. He'll be telling us why we should all be thinking about planning for what happens for when we pass on. And as ever, send in your questions to gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. Tell us what you know, what you think about the debates that we're having. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and you're On the Money. Now, in this week's budget, Chancellor Rishi Sunak unveiled yet another £6 billion for the National Health Service. That latest cash injection comes on top of a recent £12 billion NHS Maintenance Fund uplift. Then there's the £36 billion of 3-year additional NHS spend announced a few weeks ago. The growth in the NHS budget over recent years has been quite astonishing. In 1978, NHS spending accounted for 3.9% of GDP, or national income, the entire economy. By 2008, that share had risen to 6.5% of GDP. And by 2024, we learnt in this week's budget, it will hit 8.4% of GDP. In terms of actual cash, the NHS bill has soared by no less than 78% over the last decade. And there's absolutely no sign whatsoever of that ever-rising cost slowing down any time soon. Now, we all know that during lockdown, non-COVID treatments were scaled back. That's why almost 6 million people now on the government's numbers are now waiting for routine operations, the longest NHS waiting list since records began. Life-changing procedures, including hip and knee replacements and cataracts, are among those that are most longest delayed. And behind these waiting list numbers, there is, of course, untold human suffering. No wonder ministers want to be seen throwing money at the NHS. But is more money always the answer? How about spending the existing NHS budget a bit better? Now, the UK prides itself on free at the point of use healthcare. That's a principle many of us, including me, would robustly defend. But surely there is a better way to deliver universal healthcare for all without relying on a single, monolithic, often wasteful organisation employing an astonishing 1.3 million people. We're constantly told the NHS is the best in the world, but in terms of actual healthcare, mortality rates for those with cancer, strokes and heart attacks are higher in the UK than for many comparable countries. Yet it's almost impossible to suggest meaningful NHS reforms, even if you insist all the time that free at the point of view should stay. NHS insiders calling out inefficiencies have been drummed out of their jobs or ostracised. Outsiders, commentators calling for change are dismissed as heartless or even worse. Yet we can only improve the NHS, as we all want to do, getting more and better healthcare for the huge sums that we spend on it, if we stop deifying this complex institution, recognising its countless weaknesses and inefficiencies, instead of pretending such weaknesses don't exist or can only be solved with ever more money. Of course, these weaknesses, they should be vigorously addressed. And that's why at the end of this budget week, we need to pose this question. Can Rishi Sunak's billions really fix the NHS? Now, we had a similar discussion to this on Monday before the budget, and so we thought we'd reconvene now on Friday because we've all seen the colour of Rishi Sunak's money, or our money, I should say. Joining me down the line is Roy Lilly, a former NHS Trust chairman. Welcome back, Roy. We also have Dr Lawrence Buckman, a GP and former chairman of the British Medical Association's General Practitioners Committee. Welcome to you both. With me in the studio is a former nurse, now a barrister, Rebecca Butler. Very nice to see you, Rebecca. And I'm joined once again by Vicky Price, friend of the show, former chief, what were you? You were the
joint head of the government.
Joint head. You were the joint head of the government's economic service. She was one of the most senior economists in Whitehall. Let's start with you, Rebecca. How am I being unfair? What I just said. I really believe in the NHS. I want it to survive. I want free at the point of views to be maintained. I have an inbox full of emails from NHS insiders, doctors, nurses, telling me about inefficiencies and telling me why they can't talk to me about them on the record.
Well, that's very true. If you whistleblow in the NHS, you might as well just kiss goodbye to your job. So that's absolutely true. But people like me who have worked at a senior level in the NHS are able to look back, and now I see a situation where they're just simply reinventing the wheel. One of the biggest problems in the NHS is the internal market that they created back in the 1989 reforms of which was the Thatcher government, and we have been fiddling around with that internal market ever since. So that is what I see as the biggest problem with the NHS, because in and of itself, it creates infrastructure which is in and of itself expensive.
Roy Lilly, let's go to you. You've been a former chair of an NHS trust. That's a very, very important senior position, managing tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of pounds of public money. What is it about an organisation that so seriously clamps down on people who genuinely want to suggest improvements, who genuinely want to make things work better for everybody? I mean, during the Soviet Union, if you spoke out, you'd be sent to the Gulag. Is the NHS similar?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think there are instances where people have blown the whistle and they have been treated very badly. And now we have Speak Up Guardians in the NHS and everyone's trying to resolve that. But I mean, it's interesting what was just been said about the internal market. I mean, the internal market actually wasn't invented by the Thatcher government. It was Alan Milburn during Labour's years who brought in the internal market. Everybody said at the time there's no evidence that competitive tendering leverages up quality or gets a handle on price. But we still did it. We went through this whole palaver, and now, thankfully, it's being got rid of in the new health and care bill that's going through the House at the moment. So I agree. I mean, the internal market, which was designed to try and bring in attention of competitiveness to improve cost effectiveness and quality, it never worked, and we're finally getting rid of it. So, but it is a very difficult organisation to speak up in. I mean, a lot of it is. I mean, there's a lot. You see lots of it in the press where people have tried to do it, and I have to say that during COVID, it's been impossible for people to speak up. NHS England press office have frankly bullied people to death and stopped hospitals speaking even to their local newspaper.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, Roy, not because I like to see people being bullied, but as a journalist, I've seen this so often and I've been dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. To hear someone of your massive experience within the NHS say that, I think, is a formidable public service on your part. So good for you. Dr. Lawrence Buckman, welcome back to the show. We're going back to our discussion on Monday, of course. What are your thoughts on what I said at the top of this hour in light of Rishi Sunak throwing yet more and ever more money at the NHS? How about spending what we already have better?
I'm very keen on spending it better. Money is always welcome. I'm not going to say we shouldn't have it. But actually, money is completely the wrong approach in dealing with the problems of the NHS. We've not recruited enough. We don't have enough staff right across the piece. We haven't put our money where our mouth is on social care. If people are backed up in hospital, they can't get out into the community because there isn't the community care there. These things would be much more efficiently used and organised in a better way. I think they can be. And it's just not money. Money is not going to put bodies on the ground. We need every kind of health worker, doctor, nurse, porter, laboratory worker, all of those people. We need loads more. And it takes time to grow those, and money isn't the root of this problem.
Just before Dr. Lawrence Buckman there, Vicky, Roy Lilly mentioned Alan Milburn, of course, the Blair-era health secretary. You two, you and I, we're the NHS outsiders in this discussion, aren't we? But, of course, the vast majority of the population are NHS outsiders. As a fellow outsider, I should say to you, I think it's a bit odd because during those Blair-era reforms, when a lot of money was pumped into the NHS, at least under New Labour, there were conditions attached to the reform. Rishi Sunak seems to be a lot softer. It's just have the money with no conditions attached. Surely there should be a bit, along with this carrot, there should be a bit of stick.
Well, as we know, there will be some reorganisation that's going to take place, which is good news. And of course, there is money that needs to be made available for the care system, which hasn't really been receiving enough. So at least that, hopefully, will change. But I think we're in a very peculiar situation right now, and that's why those conditions perhaps cannot be met quite as quickly as we'd like them to be met, if there were any serious ones there. Every department, of course, is asked to make some savings. And become more efficient. So that's been going on with the NHS for quite some time in any case and had not been receiving what it had been asking for a number of years now. But COVID has changed this, of course. Given that there is such a backlog which hasn't been dealt with.
6 million.
Yes, but of course you need to deal with it. But I do agree with the point that if you just throw the money at it and you don't have enough people to do it, to do the work that is required, then what is the point? On the other hand, you've got to make sure that the money is available if you can get the people to do all those, procedures which simply hadn't been done. Now, there has been a question for the NHS generally, and we were looking at this when I was working for the government as well, of course. How do you make it more productive? But do you actually have the data to tell you whether you're doing things better or not, like GPs, the way they operate right now? So there are some suggestions that the system of just phoning in and talking to a GP over the phone makes them more productive. It's not guaranteed that that's
Doesn't
the
make
case.
it more productive if they misdiagnose because they can't pick up those soft signs that doctor friends of mine always tell me are so important, seeing someone in person. If they miss those soft signs and then somebody's cancer isn't treated in time, so they're an enormous burden on the NHS, as well as saving their life and giving them more time on this wonderful earth, they could also be treated for much less money.
Absolutely. The one thing, of course, we need to bear in mind is the COVID issue and how you calculate, whether the procedures that we've set in place should be here to stay or whether we can change them and go back to where we were, but also really look at productivity in a bit more detail. But the other thing is that we can't escape the fact, though it's an ageing population, there have been loads of mental issues because of COVID. all that.
And some of that increase in health spending share that I showed in my opening statement, that is demographic, isn't it? That is demographic as we become an older population.
Yeah, and we needed it, and it's a good thing we're getting it. But of course, again, the population needs to realise that this is a cost we're going to have to bear. But of course, you want it to be spent as efficiently as you possibly can. But the general calculations that there are in terms of relative efficiency of the NHS by comparison to other countries still suggest that we're doing quite well.
We're going to carry on this after the discussion, but Rebecca, just briefly before we go to the break, I look at other healthcare systems. I should get out more, but I like reading about policy in other parts of the world. I look at the Dutch system, I look at the German system, I look at the French system. They, broadly speaking, have free at the point of use, but it's a social insurance model. There's lots of state spending. You know, people don't go untreated in France because they haven't got money. They don't go untreated in Germany or in the Netherlands because they haven't got money. And yet they have a much more mixed economy system, and it seems to be a lot more efficient. And according to OECD studies, the health outcomes are often much better. Why can't we even have this discussion in the UK?
Well, it's ludicrous we can't have a discussion because, you know, you do deify the NHS. Actually, Liam, I think the best model to look at is Singapore, because Singapore works on a central provident fund, which looks like a national insurance payment. But what they do is contract out the administrative services. The clinical services are all government employed, but the administrative services, which are grotesquely inefficient and costly in our NHS, are all run by private companies.
Grotesquely? That's, you're a barrister. You weigh your words very carefully. That's the kind of word I'd use. Yeah. Grotesquely. Is that what you've seen?
Yes. Well, where you've got a situation that a clinical ward manager, so somebody like me who's got 15 years experience in the clinical setting, earns less than a middle grade manager, you've got a grotesque problem in the system. Now, I know that we don't have a massively overburdened administration side to the NHS, but we still have a big, big disconnect between what the clinical staff get and what the admin staff get. Chief executives can earn up to £300,000 a year, which is double what our Prime Minister earns.
That is a mad public sector wage when you've got no capital at risk. Yeah. You have public sector conditions of holidays and sick pay and pension. 300 grand for working in the public sector with all the safety and job security that entails. You should earn 300 grand in the private sector if you build a business and employ lots of people and sell it.
Plus, they get bonuses on that. But there's one point I do need to push back on, if I may, very politely. This doesn't go back to Alan Milburn. This just does genuinely go back to Kenneth Baker, because in the
Thatcher era health secretary.
Thatcher era, because the Kenneth Baker reforms decentralised the investment in the NHS, so it became a decentralised funding model into one where the hospitals bought their services from the local GPs, which creates problems because a district general hospital will do the lumps and bumps. But if you look at a big teaching hospital, you're looking at tertiary referral units. So how can a GP in suburban Southampton buy a liver transplant in Birmingham without that creating an administrative structure? So that's what I referred to. The internal market genuinely started with Thatcher.
Hold that thought. We'll carry on after the break. You're watching On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. We'll keep this discussion going. We got the former NHS nurse, Rebecca Butler. There she is. We've got the ex-NHS Trust Chairman, Roy Lilly, Dr Lawrence Buckman, and the Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economics and Business Research, our very own friend of the show, Vicky Price. On the Money, in-depth discussions with people who know what they're talking about. Stay with us. You're On the Money.
Hello again. It's been a wet start to the day for many of us, but the main bands of rain through the afternoon will be moving away, replaced by a mix of sunshine and showers, and it will feel less mild today and more especially through the weekend. This weather front was stuck across northern England and southern Scotland during this week, and it brought an awful lot of rainfall with it. It's still causing issues with further spells of rain moving through Wales, northern England, as well as much of Scotland through the afternoon. In some places, another 20 to 30 millimetres, and of course that falling onto saturated ground could cause some issues. But it's replaced by sunshine and showers, blustery winds pushing those showers into Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest, and cooler air follows as well, with temperatures a couple of degrees down compared to recent days, but still above average for the time of year. The wet weather continues there for eastern and northern Scotland for a time into the evening. Clear spells then follow, but another system pushes in, a very lively system overnight actually, across most parts. Very gusty winds, heavy rainfall, could be quite noisy as that arrives. Ahead of that, it's going to be clear across eastern England, and behind it, temperatures dipping to -1 for some sheltered parts of northern and northwest Scotland. Nevertheless, this heavy rain is with us first thing on Saturday. It's moving into eastern England, eastern Scotland as well. It clears to sunny spells and showers for Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest. Some of these showers again on the lively side with gusty winds. But once it pulls away, some decent sunny spells breaking out across the Midlands, eastern England as well. And a cooler day for all, with temperatures back to around average for the time of year. So we say goodbye to that system on Saturday night. Clear spells briefly before the next weather system moves in, a series of weather fronts, and wrapped around a developing area of low pressure to bring yet more wind and rain during Saturday. Much of that clearing through during the morning, replaced again by sunny spells and showers. It remains changeable on Monday.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
Welcome back, you're on the money. Now, Wednesday was budget day, of course, and Chancellor Rishi Sunak unveiled yet another £6 billion for the NHS. That's on top of a recent £12 billion maintenance fund uplift for our health service. But the question is, can all this money really fix the NHS? I'm still with Roy Lilly, former NHS Trust Chairman, Dr Lawrence Buckman, GP, former Chairman of the British Medical Association's General Practitioners Committee. In the studio, former nurse and barrister Rebecca Butler, and of course Vicky Price, friend of the show, former co-head of the government's economic service. Let's go to you first, gentlemen, if we may. It can't all be doom and gloom, of course. All of us on this panel, most of our viewers, we want the NHS to do well, we want it to perform well, we don't want to completely upend the system, but we do want some reform. Given all your experience, what would you do in a nutshell? And would you have tied all this huge amount of extra money to conditions to try and push reform of this huge monolithic health service?
Yes, if you're asking me, Lam. Yeah. So, I mean, just for the record, so that you don't get inundated with people emailing you, Kenneth Baker was never actually the Secretary of State for Health. I think our guest was thinking of Kenneth Clark, who was talking about the internal market. So just to put that right. Look, if you have a look in the Red Book, you can see there's a little sentence in the Red Book that says that the government expects that there will be 30% more elective activity in the NHS by 24-25. That's the year of the election. Now, that came as a complete surprise to everybody in the NHS. No one's consulted on that. There's been no modelling. That's just something that somebody's made up somewhere. And it's a good thing. Why not? Of course, the other omission from the budget and in the spending review is any reference to Health Education England's budget. Now, it's Health Education England that's responsible for recruiting and training new staff. So there is a misfit. So, you know I'm sounding like a broken record, and I'm slightly expecting that Lawrence Buckman is probably going to say the same thing as well. And that is, we can't do any of this without enough people. Now, the government promised 50,000 GPs by 2025. There's no way in the world that we're going to do that. The number of GPs that we want, I mean, God knows how many we actually want, but for that kind of 50,000 nurses by 2025. But for that kind of level of recruitment, it's 10,000 a year, which is more than the NHS has ever done. I think I've done it 4 times in 60 years. The recruitment numbers now are really not encouraging. We're expecting 6,000 more GPs by 2025, and there is no difference. The government haven't said whether these are full-time equivalent GPs or whether it's headcount. So, I mean, it seems to me, and I don't understand this, why this is, and Vicky may be able to help us here. I don't understand why it is that government is reluctant to deal head-on with the question of recruitment in the NHS. I mean, it's not cheap to bring people into the NHS. I know people are paying for their own degrees these days, but there are placement costs and training costs once people are in the NHS. But we can't do any of this without the right number of people. What the Prime Minister talks about in having 50,000 nurses and 6,000 GPs is frankly nonsense, and everybody in the NHS knows it's nonsense. And there is still no workforce plan in the NHS. The workforce plan can only be written with the consent of the Department of Health and the agreement of the Treasury. So, frankly, the money is terrific. As Lawrence has said, money is wonderful. Bring it on. I'll be first in the queue. But you still need people to do the job. Now, when you talk about, one of the guests was talking about the costs of management. Well, for every £100 the NHS spends, we spend £1 on managing it. And frankly, I don't think that's bad. Most independent reviews have said that it isn't bad either. And as far as productivity is concerned, before COVID, I mean, everything's been wrecked now, but before COVID, NHS productivity went up at 1.6 per annum, 1.6% per annum. You can measure it, and they did it. And it's worth pointing out that in the economy as a whole, Vicky will tell you that the productivity of UK GP Limited went up by 0.6 in the same period. So the NHS is pretty productive. It does do the job. It has needed more money, that's for sure. But this sort of willful ignorance or willful unwillingness to address the issues of workforce and training just strikes me as bonkers. And when the NHS tries to do something about that, going digital first, for example, so ring the GP on your phone first, let's see if we can sort you out on the phone, we end up with a huge row on the Daily Mail running the NHS.
Oh, come on, Roy. I mean, again, as a journalist, I have hundreds of emails from ordinary punters who are tearing their hair out trying to see their GP. And we all know that a lot of GPs we all know that a lot of GPs are doing a great job, but we also know that quite a few GPs are very, very jealously guarding their work-life balance during this pandemic, as they always do, and that needs to be said. And as for recruiting doctors, why do you have to get 15 A stars at GCSE and 5 A stars at A-level to get a place at medical school, and then we have to import loads of doctors? If you ask me, we should be able to get into medical school if you're a very bright student, but you don't have to be an absolutely perfect student. We need more rounded people to become doctors, but we can come back to that. Lawrence Buckman.
Oh, well, hang on.
Hold on, Roy. I'll bring you back in. Roy, you've had a really long say. I will bring you back in. Dr. Lawrence Buckman, what's your thought about how the government can get more GPs? It can't simply be about just importing more people.
Absolutely not. You need to grow more GPs. As Roy rightly said, it's all about Health Education England, it was the Blair government that abandoned workforce controls. And since then, workforce controls both in hospital and in general practice and amongst the nursing professions. And because of that, there is now no way of saying we need more and not just making it a political slogan, but actually having these people on the ground. It takes roughly 10 years to grow a GP. And you're quite right, we don't have to have 4 A stars at A level to get in, yet all the universities do that. They need to be leaned on by the government to have a much more realistic approach to who should be a doctor. Of course, you need to be bright and clever, but the fact is, you also have to be hardworking and able to do the job with a reasonable capacity. And that isn't just about A levels. If you're going to grow more people, we need more places in medical schools, we need more jobs for graduates, and then we can stop even believing we can import people. One of the other ideas is to move work over to the private sector, but actually that doesn't make any difference because it's still the same doctors. We don't have a supply of doctors sitting around in private practice who aren't doing any NHS work. It's the same people. The government ought to come clean and say, we've got the workforce in a mess, we haven't got the right number of people, we need a lot more people, and we need them in the right place. And that's going to take a long time. And, oh public, oh voters, you are going to have to cope with a situation that you don't like, but is going to be short of all the things that you quite rightly expect from the health service.
Rebecca Butler, what do you make of this discussion? I mean, Roy Lilly and I, we broadly agree we need lots more doctors. We can beg to differ about, are all doctors in acting in a way that patients want. But do you think that, in terms of the cost base of this, it strikes me that the NHS is already carrying on paying for an awful lot of things that aren't really good value for money. Think of those private finance initiative contracts. When I look in the budget, I still see billions of pounds a year going to finance contracts that were struck 10, 15 years ago that strike me as really bad value for money. If we want to reform the NHS and get a proper bang for our buck, surely that needs reform.
Well, you would need a very brave health secretary to drive a narrative about pulling out of the PFI contracts. We would have to effectively buy our way out of the bad debt that they create. So that, again, feeds into the where is the money going. But I think what your guests are actually saying is it's a staff recruitment problem, which is absolutely right. But what neither of them have addressed, which I am told by all of my friends who are now senior consultants and GPs, is they are leaving or going part-time because George Osborne brought in a pensions cap.
Yeah.
And because of the way the superannuated pension is structured in the NHS, a lot of senior doctors reached the cap and were then subjected to really quite high tax bills, which meant that their only option was then to leave the NHS on their full-time contracts and go part-time. A lot of people will say their GPs are part-time now, and it is precisely because of that. So it's about retention at the top as well. The government needs to address the pensions cap to keep the senior people with all of that knowledge that they've amassed over 30 years of practice, keep them practicing. A lot of GPs are part-time because of that.
Unfortunately, we are going to have to bring this discussion to an end now because we've got to go to the news headlines. Thank you very much, Rebecca Butler, former NHS barrister. We'll have you back. Vicky Price, of course. Roy, I'm sorry, we will bring you back another time to carry on this discussion. Do forgive me. And thank you also, Dr. Lawrence Buckman. It's been a good, robust discussion, and let's do it again sometime. You're watching On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. Coming up after the break, we are staying with Rebecca and Vicky for one final word. We're also going to meet the man who's hoping to change attitudes towards death. That's Phil Zalder. He's the co-founder of life insurance company, and this is what it's called, Dead Happy. Stay with us. You're On the Money.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. Here are the latest headlines. The UK hasn't ruled out military involvement in the ongoing dispute with France over post-Brexit fishing rights. The French authorities are yet to release a British scallop vessel detained yesterday for not having a licence. French prosecutors say the boat's captain will be called to court next August. The US president arrived at the Vatican earlier, where he's been meeting Pope Francis to discuss the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change and poverty. From there, Joe Biden will travel to the G20 Leaders Summit in Rome before heading to Glasgow for COP26. A serving Met police officer has been charged with child sex offences. 51-year-old Detective Constable Francois Ulwich was arrested yesterday at an address in Basingstoke. He's facing 4 charges, including attempting to meet a girl under 16. The Scottish Government's providing £41 million to help families with their winter bills. The cash will be made available for those on low incomes who are struggling to pay for energy. It'll also help those at risk of homelessness. £6 million from the pot will go to charities that work with families in need. Essex police have arrested 10 Insulate Britain activists after they staged another protest on the M25. A number of people blocked the motorway between junctions 28 and 29 earlier this morning. It comes after an injunction was put in place by the High Court banning the group from obstructing traffic. And archaeologists have discovered Roman artefacts during HS2 works in Stoke Mandeville. They made a once-in-a-lifetime discovery of statues and other pieces at St Mary's Church. I'll have more on all of today's main stories at the top of the hour. See you then.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
Welcome back. You're watching On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. We're grappling with the conundrum, which is our National Health Service, 1.3 million employees, such an important institution. Will Rishi's billions fix it? It's an incredibly fraught discussion. And so in the studio, we've still got Vicky Price, friend of the show, and former nurse, now barrister, Rebecca Butler. Rebecca, this really is the nub of the problem, isn't it? Our GPs, they are the gatekeepers to the NHS, and there are an awful lot of people, for all the good work that GPs do, and the BMA will complain about this and they'll try and beat me up, but there are an awful lot of people out there who are angry with our GPs. Again, not all GPs, and for all the good work lots of GPs do, some of them have behaved in a way and are behaving in a way which upsets people and actually is a threat to health.
Yeah, they are primary care, and that means they are the first port of call. And I'm afraid, as a gatekeeper, they're pretty leaky. Now, the BMA can shout and scream as much as it likes, as has always been the case. But the fact is that going back nearly 20 years now, GPs got an incredibly generous deal from the Blair government. And as a result of that deal, where they stopped doing their own on-calls, that then led to an increase in A&E attendances. So things that GPs should be dealing with, people in
They just send you to A&E.
In frustration, they go to A&E. You then have your waiting times in A&E going up, where genuine emergencies are put in a queue behind people with a rash that is better dealt with by a GP. So I'm afraid that GPs have been the ultimate beneficiary of pretty much every spending round that the NHS has got. And all I can see in my very, very old and cynical way, Liam, is that they are delivering less per pound than they ever used to. Now, my daughter is a junior doctor, and when she was being interviewed, there was a big push for the students to go into GP. Most of them don't want to do it because it's not seen as the sexy end of medicine.
Yeah. You want to be a surgeon, don't you?
Oh, you want to be, or an anaesthetist in the case of my daughter, but, you know, you want to be at the sharp end of medicine, and frankly, being in a hospital is more fun. But GPs are letting people down. Their prime customers are older people who can't access technology in the way that younger people can. You simply cannot ask a lady to send you a picture of the mole that is now itchy and bleeding into a GP and expect a diagnosis.
Again, as a responsible broadcaster on a grown-up channel, I do need to say we're not talking about all GPs or even most GPs. We're talking about some GPs. We're reflecting the experiences of ourselves, our families, certainly in my case, many people who email me, contact me as a newspaper columnist, as a television presenter. Of course, the BMA will reject a lot of what we've said, and we've reflected their views. But I do think, fair comment, there is a discussion to be had about how our GPs, many of whom have been complete heroes and heroines during the pandemic, how they act as gatekeepers for the NHS. Vicky, so often in desperation, I turn to you for the final word. What's going to happen?
Well, the NHS is going to get more money. We know that. The important thing would be where it is actually spent. I mean, COVID is still with us, I'm afraid, and therefore it's going to muddle the waters for the next couple of years, during which period, of course, it's all being rethought in terms of how exactly that health of the nation is kept up. And the truth is that we have seen life expectancy go backwards during
good
COVID.
point.
So we need to spend a lot more, but in the right way, to get back to some trajectory which is a sensible one that we were seeing before this pandemic hit us.
Well, there's been so many downsides to this ghastly pandemic, this ghastly lockdown. Let's hope we're through it. And let's hope that one of the upsides is that we can have an honest, open, factual, well-intentioned discussion about the NHS. That's certainly the kind of discussion we try and have on this show and on this channel, and you two are a big part of that. Vicky, as ever, very nice to see you. Rebecca, former nurse turned barrister. What a career trajectory you've had. Very nice to see you both. All the best. Now, we can read some of your emails, some of your views at home on this discussion. This is Sophie. The NHS needs reform, not more money. If you give the NHS more money, it just means more money will be wasted. Marlena agrees with that view. She says the NHS is a bottomless pit. There are too many missed appointments, too many managers, and too many administrative posts. And the final say for now, we'll definitely return to this subject on my show On the Money and on GB News in general. That goes to Rindy. She says we need more nurses than managers in the NHS. Rishi Sunak needs to look at nurse training, which needs a good shake-up. Thanks for all your emails. Your voice really does matter. Keep emailing us, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us @gbnews. We read out as many of your emails as we can, and we read them all, so do stay in touch with us. Remember, On the Money, it's your show too. Now we're on my second Money Talks interview. Many of us don't like to dwell on death, or what happens when we shift off this mortal coil, as they say. But one company that's hoping to change all that and thinks that we should be dwelling on the moment when we passed away is Dead Happy. What a great name. This is the UK's fastest growing life insurance provider, which aims to get more people thinking about and then planning for what they want to happen when they die. Now, co-founder of Dead Happy is Phil Ziegler. He helped found the company in 2013, and since then the business has boomed, with revenue growing by over 120% in the first half of 2021 compared to the same period last year. And here he is. Phil, very nice to see you. Welcome to Money Talks. I'm delighted that you're here. How did you get into this business? Why is it that you think we should be thinking more about when we pass away? People don't like to think about it, do they?
No, they certainly don't, Liam. And I guess I was in that camp. But my journey into this was quite a personal one. About 16 years ago, 2005, I was a fit, healthy 38-year-old, married with 2 lovely children, doing very well, not a care in the world. And of course, like many 8-year-olds, indestructible. But one day I felt quite ill, which was unlike me. I went home, and 3 weeks later I woke up in hospital.
Blimey.
I'd been in a coma, and I did nearly die. So when you go through an experience like that, you can imagine you do stop and you do think.
How much of an issue is this in the UK? Are we particularly bad, particularly good by sort of Western advanced economy standards at planning for our own deaths?
The truth is, we're as bad as everyone else. So in the UK, as I learned to discover as I went to look into all of this, there's a gap estimated to be about £2.4 trillion, what they call the protection gap. In the US, it's about $25 trillion. And it's similarly replicated through most sort of modern economies wherever you go. It's just one of those final taboo subjects that, for whatever reason, well, for the obvious reason, I think, no one really wants to dwell on and think about death.
Of course, we often see on television, don't we, adverts for funeral planning and things like that. But what you're talking about is something a lot more fundamental, isn't it? You're talking about life assurance. So just for people who don't know, explain broadly what that is and why, if we can afford to have it, we should have it. And if we can't afford to have it, how we can maybe make provision so we can.
Yeah. Sure. So what we deal with is term life insurance. And it really is for the catastrophe. So typically in the UK, you would have it if you have sort of liabilities like mortgages, you have dependents, children, etc. So that if you were to die, then they, without it, will be left in quite significant financial difficulty. And that's what we look to provide, not the other end of life, the sort of funeral plans and so forth, which is probably more suited to the older generation.
And what's different about what you're trying to do? Because, of course, this is a big industry. The UK's got an enormous life insurance industry, a huge pensions industry. In many ways, we're sort of one of the world's leading proponents of these things. What's different about your business?
Well, I guess many things are different. Where we've set ourselves up for is to try and deal with this, specifically with this protection gap. The industry has been very successful, as you say, long-standing for hundreds of years, but it tends to look after the same sort of people who are able to go and get financial advice and so forth, and that's great, and that's wonderful. And they cover about 14 million people. There's 8.5 million people in the UK that it doesn't cover, and it doesn't cater for very well. And the main reasons that we felt, and my experience when we looked at this, is because it's really complex.
Yeah.
It's really... it's
quite off-putting, isn't it?
It's really off-putting. It's relatively expensive.
Yeah.
It is really inflexible. So there are lots of challenges with life insurance, which actually are very different from other insurance products. And when I looked at this, as someone from the insurance background, coming from more traditional insurance products, I really was curious as to why that was. And really that was the genesis of saying, well, we can do a lot better. We can provide products that actually meet people's needs, and particularly the millennial audience, because that's typically when you're getting married and having children and getting your first mortgage.
Yeah.
And it's those people that have very different buying habits and expectations.
So what's been the key for you to spreading what's often been the preserve of the middle classes and the professional classes, for want of a better phrase, spreading that across the income scale so it's more inclusive? Of course, it's not a universal provision, but so more people can get access to what a lot of wealthy people, if we're honest, take for granted.
So there are a couple of things that we've done to make it really simple. So first of all is language. Anyone can go onto our site and they will not come across jargon. It is a really simple process. Everyone can understand it. It makes sense. we also position the product in what we like to think is a really simple way to think about it. So if you start on thinking about life insurance, the first question you often get asked is, how much cover do I need? And that's like, well, where do you even start with that? And we've come up with this platform.
Cover is the amount of money you'll be paid out if the worst happens.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. So what we've done is we've asked a different question. And we ask, what do you want to happen when you die?
Yeah.
Because that's a far more intuitive thing to think about. And then we help customers think about with our Death Wish platform, which is saying, well, what are the actual things that you want to make happen? And if that's paying off a mortgage, that's great, or paying for your funeral. But actually, it opens up a whole myriad of other amazing things that you can actually make happen, and some really positive and some really good things, which might sound a strange thing to say, but actually you can do some pretty amazing things for those your loved ones, even after you've died.
Ideally, what sort of age should people start thinking about this? It sounds like a rather morbid thought, but as you say, when people get married, if they're lucky enough, of course, a lot of younger people find this very, very difficult. They try and get a mortgage, try and get on the housing ladder. Again, for a lot of so-called generation rent, that's tough. But what kind of age should people start thinking about life assurance in order to take advantage of your services?
Well, we have customers from age 18 through to 60. I mean, you don't need life insurance if you don't have dependents or people, because ultimately it's one of those strange products. It's unique. It's the one product that when you buy it, you will not benefit from it because you have to be dead. It depends on who, but people get married age 18, so there's no reason why you might not, that might not be relevant. So it's more circumstantial rather than age-related. But what I would say is, and this is one of the things that we feel passionately about, is we made it very accessible. So even premiums can start from £1 a month. Compared to most of the industry standard that's starting at like £5 or £6
and that just gets you going, just to get into the habit.
Absolutely.
Set up the standing order.
And that's probably quite an important point you make, is you can start on something like that. Most life insurance is inflexible. So once you set the amount, you can't change it. So that's something that we've changed. That's
interesting. Yeah. That's interesting. But it must be particularly difficult for you to engage with people who are currently, say, 25 to 45, because I know from a lot of my own journalism and writing, that is exactly the generation that's having such a hard time financially. They're often worse off than their parents. Even if they've got degrees and their parents didn't have degrees, they're desperately trying to buy a house. They're spending loads of money on rent, not just in London and the southeast, but in many parts of the country too. So it seems to me your message of easier language and more approachable products is a good idea, but it's a tough road you're treading at this time.
Well, it is, in that it's always going to be what they call a distressed purchase. You don't want to buy life insurance. So the two things, we do make it easy, we make it relatively to the market, very, very cheap. But the other thing that we do, which I guess is really crucial, is in terms of all of our communications, we try and bring in a little bit of amusement and humour and that engagement process, just to make it less of a morbid process. And actually we find that our customers, and we obviously take a lot of customer feedback, bizarre as it may sound, actually quite enjoy the process of buying life insurance.
Dead Happy is it's a good name.
It is a great name, and I'd love to take credit for it. That is my co-founder through and through. He is the creative genius in the business.
Well, it strikes me obviously we can't endorse any of the products. That's not what Money Talks is about. We're not here to provide any kind of financial advice. But I would say that you're somebody who's trying to make a very unapproachable business approachable and accessible and clear. And if, in that sense, good luck with your business and many congratulations on what you're trying to do. It's nice to see you. Phil Zeidler of Dead Happy. Great name. I like that. You've been watching On The Money with me, Liam Halligan. Join me on Monday at 1 p.m. or catch up with previous episodes via the GB News app. Thanks for joining me today and see you next time. Have a lovely weekend. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan and that was On The Money.
Hello again. It's been a wet start to the day for many of us, but the main bands of rain through the afternoon will be moving away, replaced by a mix of sunshine and showers, and it will feel less mild today and more especially through the weekend. This weather front was stuck across northern England and southern Scotland during this week, and it brought an awful lot of rainfall with it. It's still causing issues with further spells of rain moving through Wales, northern England, as well as much of Scotland through the afternoon. In some places, another 20 to 30 millimetres, and of course that falling onto saturated ground could cause some issues. But it's replaced by sunshine and showers, blustery winds pushing those showers into Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest, and cooler air follows as well, with temperatures a couple of degrees down compared to recent days, but still above average for the time of year. The wet weather continues there for eastern and northern Scotland for a time into the evening. Clear spells then follow, but another system pushes in, a very lively system overnight actually, across most parts. Very gusty winds, heavy rainfall, could be quite noisy as that arrives. Ahead of that, it's going to be clear across eastern England, and behind it, temperatures dipping to -1 for some sheltered parts of northern and northwest Scotland. Nevertheless, this heavy rain is with us first thing on Saturday. It's moving into eastern England, eastern Scotland as well. It clears to sunny spells and showers for Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest. Some of these showers again on the lively side with gusty winds. But once it pulls away, some decent sunny spells breaking out across the Midlands, eastern England as well. And a cooler day for all, with temperatures back to around average for the time of year. So we say goodbye to that system on Saturday night. Clear spells briefly before the next weather system moves in, a series of weather fronts and wrapped around a developing area of low pressure to bring yet more wind and rain during Saturday. Much of that clearing through during the morning, replaced again by sunny spells and showers. It remains changeable on Monday.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else,